Welcome to this next installment in our ongoing series in which I'm speaking with financial advisors about scaling financial planning. Today I am speaking with Ben Dobler. He is a director of financial planning at Personal Choice Financial Advisors. He's a CFP, he's an enrolled agent, he's a CSLP, which is a certified student loan professional. And I will say this, when we did the initial prep call, I was a little worried because we immediately were talking about how the fact that his firm does tax prep. And I was like, oh boy, well, that's maybe not universally applicable. Not every firm does tax prep. And so, well, a lot of these lessons translate. They absolutely do. First of all, I think the subject of adding tax prep is an interesting one. And so we cover that a little bit. It's maybe something that you're thinking about in your firm as well. But there's also plenty of other concepts in here that I think are useful for everybody, whether you're doing tax prep or not. By the way, not all their clients are also tax prep clients. We cover things like how they structure the firm itself in terms of how they're delivering financial planning services, who's doing the analysis versus who's doing the delivery of the planning recommendations. We talk about tools and processes. Get ready for a mention of the checklist manifesto. It's going to happen. Anyway, lots of good stuff in here, so please enjoy this conversation with Ben Dobler. Ben, thank you for joining me and talking about your process for how you've scaled tax return reviews. It's that time of year, so I'm glad to be talking to you right now when you're in the middle of it. But first, just to set the table a little bit, how many clients does your firm serve, and do you try to, they don't always opt in, I recognize, but do you attempt to do a tax return review for every single one of them?
Yeah, thanks for having me in the podcast, Roger. So we're a team of 8 currently, so we're kind of in that small RIA space. We've got 3 advisors, we have 2 planning team members, and then we have 1 head of operations and 2 interns currently as well. So we're serving about 200 clients. I would say about 3/4 of them are tax planning clients as well.
Mhm.
So really the only ones that we're not doing tax return reviews for are kind of those lower tier segmentation C clients. Typically in our firm, those are people who are under 500,000 of AUM as a household, and they're going to have simpler accounts. They might not have a taxable account. They might only have a small IRA with us, something like that, where there just aren't as many opportunities for us to do that type of work for them. But we do it for as many as we can, and then we do have 1 or 2 of the A and B clients that might just decline tax
Sure.
planning as a service as well.
Got it. Okay, great. And then so we'll talk about your process in a second, but I wanted to actually unpack a little bit when we talked earlier about how you've set up, you mentioned your team there. And if I recall correctly, the way you approach tax planning in general, and presumably tax return reviews, although you tell me if I'm wrong about that, is you have a center of excellence model where the advisors are generalists in a number of things, but then I suppose, and you are the center of excellence on the tax planning side, I believe you have escalation points within the firm. Maybe just talk about within that team when we're doing, we can talk about tax return reviews, I guess. I know it's tax planning in general, but specifically for reviews, is there a level that advisors are doing and then there's an escalation to you, the center of excellence, or is the center of excellence person doing all of them? How is the labor itself divided up within a tax return review within that model?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something we definitely want to leverage the strengths of each individual team member as much as possible as we're growing that team. So we have one of the advisors does most of the investment management. The other 2 advisors lead more of the meetings. And one of our uniques is we have that divide where we have a separate planning team. Now, usually that's myself and one other person. We're not actually in most of those meetings. We're doing a lot of the planning behind the scenes. We're doing a lot of the tax return reviews, the tax planning. But then we do get pulled into some of those more complicated meetings for the tax planning when and where it makes sense. So I would say maybe 20% of the meetings, myself or the other planning team member will actually join and help run that discussion, some of the analysis with the client. But most of the ones that are going to be simpler are other advisory staff are going to manage those relationships and they'll run through the tax planning as well.
Got it. I think that's a really important call out. I think traditionally, a lot of firms, investments traditionally has been something we as an industry have known how to scale for a long time. It's just more inherently scalable. The tools are more scalable. We can throw everybody in index funds and models. Um, but planning has not been built in that way. And sorry. So investments, I think it's very common to have like the investment person in the firm, right? And the investment person is the one who runs investments for everybody, and then they get parachuted into meetings when there's an investment conversation to have. But
Sure.
with planning, I think with planning, it's probably pretty rare to have a similar model where there's a planning set of people or team. Generally, those are the same people who are the advisors, right? We ask the advisors to be planners at the same time. And it's interesting to me that you're starting to do on the planning side what a lot of firms are used to doing on the investment side, which is I have a relationship manager here. I have an investment person here who I parachute in at times, but generally they're there to scale that offering to all clients. But then you're doing it on the planning side of too. And I think that's new. Like that's an interesting new thing I don't hear often, especially among our customers, where you're trying to do something similar from a scaling perspective on the planning side. So that's an interesting call out. I appreciate you talking about that. I didn't realize actually from our previous call that those planning centers of excellence aren't even always in the client meetings. Like it's not like an advisor double dutying client relationships and planning. It's a separate kind of discipline within the firm. Super interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's a great comparison over to the investment side that I hadn't thought of as much, but does make a lot of sense. And one of the reasons we have so many tools, so many checklists and processes that we use to support the planning and the tax planning specifically is it is so complex. So
yeah.
much of our work overlaps, but it's different from what a CPA might do or an attorney might do. And we're doing all of those things to some extent while we're also managing the investments. And so there's a lot of complexity. It's always changing. There's always new laws coming out, as you know. And it's just something that we felt made the most sense to really have specialized staff
hmm
in-house to work through.
Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah. Thank you. All right. So one of the things that we also talked about, and you sort of alluded to it, which is you have brought some tax prep in-house. I believe that wasn't something your firm always did. That, of course, is going to impact the way you scale tax planning as well. So maybe just talk about that decision, how you decided to bring tax prep in-house. To what extent do you do that for all your clients? I'm sure some are still firing up TurboTax every year, but what was the thinking behind that? And then we'll get into process a little bit, but just, I mean, presumably it does impact your ability to scale the planning side.
Yeah, so I would say about half of our clients we're doing tax returns in-house for. And then of that other half, probably about half of those, so about a quarter of our clients total, are preparing their own tax returns using usually TurboTax, but could be one of those other softwares to self-prepare, or they have an outside tax preparer that they just had before they started working with us and they wanted to keep working with, and that's fine. But we don't really see it as much of a profit center. It is something that is obviously a big hurdle for us to cross during tax season. And the only way we're able to make it work is by having those separate planning staff, where during tax season, myself and then the other planning team member, he's also a CPA, will work on tax returns 80% of our time. And because
hmm
of that, we push a lot of our meetings out later in the year on those planning topics until this time of year when it's summer and then later in the fall as well. So really what it does help us with the tax planning, though, we obviously have the tax returns for those clients right off the bat. We have all the supporting tax documents to understand where those numbers came from, and really just helps us to be positioned to begin tax planning right after tax season for a lot of those clients.
Yeah, sure. I mean, just getting the data is super easy now that it originated in your within your walls as well. I'm sure that, yeah, we could go into that a ton. I'm sure there's a lot of people. I know there are a lot of people we work with who are contemplating the idea of, do I bring some of the tax prep in-house? Now that I'm so deep into taxes already, there's service reasons or scalability reasons why they're considering prep as well. Um, a conversation for another time. So all right, so we are now. I'm recording this in May with you, and so we're at least in the process now. And I always kind of ask this question, which I know seems super basic, but and I actually know half the answer because you get them in house. But like, how do you go about requesting tax return? How do you organize the project around? We have this list of clients. We got to ask for tax returns. Half of them I already got, but some of them you got to ask for. How are you designing that process, and then how do you actually go ahead and do those requests?
Yeah, so it's probably a two-phase process for us. The first phase, we want to collect as many as possible during or right after tax season. So obviously, if we do the tax returns, we have that in-house already. But for those people who self-prepare, usually as soon as they finish their return in TurboTax, they have an option to just download a big PDF that has all that those pages in that. We encourage them to, as soon as they're done, just put it in our client vault. So we have a copy as well, and then we won't need to bother them for it. It's something that's quick, it's easy. While they're thinking about it, they can do it and drop that in our vault. On the other side, where they're working with an outside tax preparer, we try and work with the tax preparers. Ideally, it's only a couple different tax preparers that are servicing most of our clients in that way. And we can get prior authorizations, any permissions or forms that the tax preparer might need so that they have permission to share those returns with us. And typically, the way we'll do it is after tax season, we'll reach out and we'll just send that person a list of all the clients that we know of that they prepare returns for and just say, hey, can you share these all securely with us? We have a Google folder we use for that, and they can just drop them right in there, get that taken care of, and then we have all those returns as well. So I would say between the ones we prepare, the people who self-prepare and upload them right away, and then those tax preparers who will share them with us, we probably get 80% of the returns by the end of April. But
Wow.
there are a lot of other documents we need. We need the tax returns for the other 20%, and then the pre-retiree clients will request other documents like pay stubs to better understand their situation. So that's where phase two comes in, and we do use an email blast. We pull a lot of this data out of our CRM to tell us who's their tax preparer, um, are they pre-retirees where they would have something like a pay stub we would need, and then we create essentially custom email templates in Gmail that we can populate some of that data into and send that out pretty early after tax season's over as well, and try and track down those remaining few documents.
Yeah, so I'll work backwards. I remember us talking about your mail merge that you use through Gmail. What I'm hearing is um, we're able to do email blasts that are just general, but then you also through your CRM and then that mail merge feature, you're able to kind of slice and dice. You can say this category of clients where I know I'm going to be asking for these three documents, they get this version of the blast email. And then this set of clients who have some other situation, I'm only asking for two documents, they get another version of the email. So you're driving a lot of automation out of the CRM. But a lot of it is helped by just the fact that now I move back one, you've already got a lot of the data. You've already sliced it and diced down to the point where it's just a subset of people. You're not trying to take your entire book and have 15 different customized emails that are going across to them. You do the easy ones first, and then we kind of zero in on those remaining group. And the easy ones, one thing that I wanted to highlight is the pre-authorizations with the tax professionals, right? So that's something that we have all year to do. Like, so we're recording this in May. Advisors are getting tax returns in. They can make note of who their clients are working with as tax professionals if that's not noted in the CRM already, or in Holistic Plan, we have a field for doing that too. But let's get a list of all the people our clients work with. But then let's get pre-authorizations now. When we're not in the when it's not in March and the CPA or the tax preparer is already slammed with a bunch of other stuff. Let's make hay while the sun shines. Get those authorizations now. And then I love the idea of just one list. Like it's not, it doesn't need to be 12 emails to the tax preparer. One email with 12 names on it. Drop it in this link, drop it in this place, and we'll take care of it. It just makes it super scalable and it cuts your client out. Your client doesn't have to do all that. That your client's like, hey, I have my professionals who are working together. They're taking care of this. I don't have to download the thing and upload the thing, and I don't know how to scan stuff. Like, cut the client out of that whole process and let the professionals take care of it. It's a really great way to take care of things in a scalable way, right? We
Yeah,
used to do actually, yeah. So I was going to say we used to actually, even when in the other direction, we had certain CPAs that we worked with who um, they would have like 18 or 20 or 40 clients in common with us. And the tax letter process, which we're not going to talk about in this call, but we had a spreadsheet with them. So instead of sending 18, 20, 40 separate tax letters to them, we worked with the tax preparer to generate a spreadsheet and had all our clients, common clients here, and then in columns, like what were all the things that we did with them. It's another example of how, especially if you have areas where clients are working with one center of influence, you can really work with that center of influence so it's valuable in both directions in a scalable way because they're looking for scale too. You know what I mean? So, sorry, you were saying.
No, absolutely. That's love the spreadsheet idea. It is something that you're going to want to work proactively with the tax preparers on because they're all going to want something different, right? So the more you have in common with those centers of influence, the more clients they have, the more you know what their expectations are. And that's something you can absolutely get a sense of before tax season. I will say that a lot of tax preparers that I've seen, they will want a new authorization every year. And so what that looks like is going to vary. Some tax preparers, they just need an email or verbal authorization from the client. That's something they could do really at any point, but they could do when they're communicating with them during tax filing season. And that's what you want to make sure they have top of mind. If they have a physical form they want the client to sign, especially if the client does not use electronic signature or download things very well, that's something you want to make sure that they're thinking of and they have the client sign when they're doing the tax returns. And so, kind of getting a sense of what that tax preparer is going to be looking for before tax season starts, and then right before tax season starts in January, sending them another quick reminder of, hey, just as a reminder, could you please get permission to share the tax returns for XYZ clients and send that spreadsheet or send that email?
Hmm. Yeah, it really seems like the perfect time to be doing it, like right now. In fact, while you're going through, if you do a tax return review for a client, what a great time when you're already in tax mode with them to just make sure that you've refreshed that permission with their tax preparer, right? Hey, I see that you worked with so and so. Were you happy working with them? Yes or no? Okay. But let's assume yes. Well, that's great. Are you planning to work with them again next year? You are? Okay, good. Let's make sure that we have that same permission set up so they can give me the tax. It's such it segues nicely from other stuff you've been doing with them on the tax return review process already. Love that. Um, you mentioned your CRM, and one of the questions I always ask in these interviews, and I know it sounds super simple, but how do you just track status? You said we get most of the returns by the end of April, which is amazing. That's got to be a record. Now we're into May, and I believe y'all use surge meetings, and so as that first group of surge meetings happens, is probably when you're talking about these tax return reviews. But how do you track status so that when September comes along and that one client or two clients who extend, for example, or they were on vacation when you were trying to get the tax return, how are you tracking to make sure that nobody gets missed as we get farther and farther into the year?
Yeah, it's definitely something that CRM can assist with. We use Salesforce, a version of that Accelerate, and we're switching to Quiver right now, which is kind of another instance of Salesforce. But it can be as simple or as complicated as you want to make it. The way we do it, I would love to say we have it all automated. It's all flowing through a CRM, but what we do is we filter clients via certain fields in our CRM. So the most obvious field is, are we meeting with them in the summer? Are we doing tax planning? That's a checkbox. And what we do is we run a list of all of our clients organized by those checkbox fields, and we just export that to a spreadsheet. So
Yep.
ultimately, we are tracking it all in a spreadsheet, but we start with the CRM as just a way of organizing that. We get the clients' names, contact info, we get any of those custom checkboxes of what meetings they're going to be invited to, and we get some of that other data, like whether they're retired or not, so that we know how to organize those email blasts and how to track them down and who the tax preparer is. That's another thing that we pull off of the tax return. If we're not the preparer, we want to know who is doing it. You can track that, I think, in Holistic Plan as well, but we have a field for that in our CRM.
Yep. Yeah, there's no shame in using a spreadsheet to track progress on this stuff. I think that's a common story that I hear from just about everybody, honestly. I think the CRMs um, sometimes struggle with the idea of this is a project I do every year. And so sometimes you can set a status on a household or a client that says this is true or this is not true. But really we need to set that status every year. And then we kind of need to start over fresh every year. And that's something that I think we sometimes struggle with in some of those systems. I'm sure it's out there, but it's maybe a little less native than we're used to. So spreadsheet's a good answer. All right. Okay. You mentioned earlier, so now let's get into the meat of like when you actually are doing reviews. And we've already talked about the fact that the reviews are happening in a special part of the company. The relationship advisor, I'm sure, is their job is to get familiar with. They have to be familiar with it to talk about it in the meeting, but the actual detailed work is happening in the tax planning center of excellence. Um, you mentioned that you've got a lot of checklists, you have a lot of infrastructure on little tools that you've built. When you're going through the actual tax return review, so you have one sitting in front of you, what are some of the tools that you have available to you that help you scale and do that in an efficient way?
Yeah, well, certainly the one that you've helped create, Plan, is a big piece of that. But a lot of it does come back to these internal checklists that we've created and things that other firms have created as well. So it really comes back to, for me, there's a book called The Checklist Manifesto. I'll go ahead and pitch it. Here's my copy. Here,
Yes.
I don't receive any referral bonuses, unfortunately, if you purchase it, but it's from Atul Gawande, if I'm saying that correctly. He's a former surgeon who got into public health and really just trying to find a way to make sure in surgery and in other fields of health that we're making sure we're not missing any of those critical steps that are going to save lives. So a lot of that can translate over into financial planning. There's so much complexity in this field, and we've found that if we have a checklist, we can make sure that we're not missing any of those critical steps. We're covering all those topics, but we're still leaving the advisors flexibility to customize things or the planning team to add on additional topics if they're needed. So there's a few different types we use. One is we do use FP Pathfinder. Some of those resources link out of Plan, and that just helps us keep track of things like the RMD rules, especially for inherited IRAs. They have a tax reference sheet called Important Numbers that's really helpful. And then we have an internal kind of just bulleted checklist of about 10 or 11 items that we want to make sure we cover for pre-retiree or retiree clients. Most of those are going to be similar, but the difference is for retirees, we're going to look at IRMA brackets, we're going to look at Roth conversions. For pre-retirees, more often, we're going to look at pre-tax versus Roth savings. And then we're going to look at the student loan impact because we have a lot of clients that have student loans. And this is really just a list of topics, but it is blank other than that. So it is just kind of a template of making sure we cover all these things, but then it's up to the planning team and the advisor to fill in that information and fill in their analysis of each of those topics and just kind of go from there. So it really helps us to take our mental energy off of remembering those basic steps and make sure they get done, but really free up that mental energy to focus on the more complicated analysis part and the client relationship pieces that are important as well. And then
Yeah,
we have some templates that supplement as well. I don't know if we want to get into those too much, but
yeah, you've got some, not just checklists, but I think some like I would say like calculation worksheets, would you say? Could you kind of, I don't know, give a couple of examples of those? Because I think those are interesting enough that we've even been talking a little bit about, okay, what we should be learning from some of this stuff. So what are some of the kind of like ancillary tools that you've had to build in-house beyond just the checklist and beyond using a list of plan? Like what are some of the analysis type tools you're using?
yeah, so I'll caveat this by saying this is mainly for pre-retiree clients. We don't really
Mhm.
need to do any of this for the retiree clients, but for us, it comes down to everything we can do in software that's already built in there for us, we want to do. Software is going to be the easiest way. We know someone else has vetted this information, done the calculations, and it's all there ready for us out of the box. So a ton of these things we do in Plan, but outside of Plan, we ran into just wanting to do a full projection for pre-retiree clients of their wages throughout the year and showing their retirement plan contributions as well, making sure they hit those maximums. And then if we ran into an issue with tax withholding for some of those clients, we wanted to be able to advise them to adjust that withholding. So we have a spreadsheet for kind of that wages projection I described, and then we have a separate spreadsheet to calculate the W-4 changes that they might need to make and try and simulate what their new withholding would look like if they were to say add extra withholding, change their filing status on their W-4, claim additional child tax credits, something like that. We use a spreadsheet as much as possible for that, but there are other tools that are available off the shelf, really for free. Paycheck City is a great one that lets you simulate pay stubs. It's just paycheckcity.com, I think is the website. And you can simulate federal as well as state level withholdings through there to really just kind of mock up what's this pay stub going to look like if I do have the client change the withholding the way I'm recommending.
Got it. Well, stay tuned. Both of those things on the roadmap. But yes, but that's another scaling strategy, right? I mean, it's building checklists, and then if you've done the same calculation on a scrap paper next to your computer 6 times, it's time to bring that onto the computer and at least, kind of automate at least the data entry piece of getting those numbers back out. And I just highlight one more thing that we talked about in a previous call. before we go. Checklists are kind of a double-edged sword, and you acknowledge this, that checklists, a good checklist takes your mind off of the easy stuff so you don't miss something. But it's not so prescriptive that you can't be creative. I think that was an important point you made, and I believe this too, which is that good financial planning is a creative discipline. It should be when we're doing it really well. It's not just following bullet points. Could you talk about um, how you try to walk that line between making your checklist super prescriptive so you definitely don't meet anything or just don't miss anything versus giving yourself freedom to find that thing and to use your training and kind of extract some of that joy of what financial planning is, which is in the end a creative discipline.
Yeah, it's really getting into, I think, the balance between the art and the science of financial planning, right? I always think back to with the Checklist Manifesto, the author of the book helped create the safe surgery checklist that the World Health Organization uses. And to give you an example, that only has 10 to 15 points on it, but one of the questions is just for the anesthesist. It just says, are there any patient-specific concerns? It doesn't tell you what the patient-specific concerns are there. It doesn't tell you what to do about them. It's just making sure you ask that question and that you think about that. So that's a lot of our goal here, is just to make sure we're thinking about if Roth conversions are appropriate. We're thinking about the impact of IRMA. And that's where that checklist, that's the core of our process, is just a topical list of things we want to cover, but it's up to the advisor to fill those in. I would say where we have more prescriptive checklists, like the FP Pathfinder checklists I mentioned, I think are much more prescriptive. We use those more situationally if there is a specific topic that we are already working on, and we want to make sure we don't miss any of those steps. So we're looking at the inherited IRA RMD rules, for instance. There are so many places you can kind of trip through those or forget about things. We want to make sure we catch all those items. But when it comes to something like should you save into a pre-tax or a Roth account, that's going to depend on a lot of variables. That's going to be hard to capture all of that prescriptively. What's their future tax rate going to look like? What accounts do they have available to them? There's a lot of different variables there. We just want to leave open to the advisor to fill in, or the planning team to kind of fill in those different considerations.
Yeah, love that. Well, thank you, Ben. We covered some good stuff in here. I appreciate hearing about not just process wise, but also structure wise. I think your firm has addressed this scaling question in a couple ways, not just what you do, but how you do it, and even who does it within the firm, which I think is really important. So I appreciate the work y'all have done and the thought you've put into this, and the time you've taken to share with me and the rest of us. So thank you, Ben.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Roger.
There you have it, my conversation with Ben Dobler. Thank you, Ben. And a thank you to my friend Will Kaplan, who gave me a heads up about their firm. Will works at a CRM company called Quiver. I noticed Ben mentioned them during the call. This is not me endorsing any CRM or anything like that. Just a thank you to Will and a heads up on where you may come across that name. Some key takeaways from the call for me. First of all, that structural thing, right? I think it's pretty common, especially in firms that do heavy financial planning, that the financial advisor, who's like the client relationship advisor, is also the lead planner. It was interesting to me to hear about a structure where you have investments as a team, financial planning as a team, and client service delivery as a team. And just like it's common for an investment team to kind of come in and out of meetings, it sounds like financial planning experts come in and out of meetings. That's kind of a new structure for me. I'm sure maybe a few of you, it exists for you, but that's an interesting idea for me. We talked about tax prep. It sounds like they added it relatively recently. In fact, as they got deeper into financial tax planning, they made the election that, okay, for us to give a complete service here, we're adding tax prep. That was interesting to me. Also, get it now, but get permission from your client's tax preparers so that you can ask for that return when it's done. I mean, it blew my mind that they already have all their tax returns in by the end of April. Like, that's unheard of, right? But they did it because they did the prep work in advance, so that all they had to do was send a list to the tax preparers and said, hey, when it's ready, these are the 12 people or however many people. Could you send us the tax returns, upload them here? There's no shame in using a spreadsheet to track status during the year. This is This is just a simple project planning thing. You got to track status somewhere. We do have a screen within HolistiPlan called Tax Return Staging. You might want to check that out as a way to track status across all of your households throughout the different steps of your workflow. And then I guess the last big one, they're big into checklists. I'm big into checklists. I thought it was useful to hear. I think I'm very much a checklist maximalist. Like if I had my way, I'd have 8,000 step checklists. What I heard from Ben is like, you don't have to do it that way. Hit the highlights. It's better to have a solid 12-point checklist than an 8,000 step checklist. But make sure the 12 points are like the big ones. You're trying to remove cognitive load so that the advisor can focus on the real value add creative pieces. So anyway, a lot in there, a lot in 30 minutes. So thank you to Ben. I really appreciate the time spent sharing with you your financial planning process. Thank you to those of you who listened. Best of luck.